If you believe love makes a family, please consider subscribing. And let me know in the comments, what does family mean to you? My name is Margaret Rose Patterson, and I'm 73 years old. I've lived through the Korean War as a child, watching my father come home changed and broken, raised 4 children through economic hardship and social upheaval, buried a husband after 42 years of marriage, survived breast cancer twice, and a stroke that left me partially paralyzed for 6 months, and thought I understood what family meant after all these decades walking this earth. But last Christmas, 3 words spoken in a whisper shattered everything I believed about love, sacrifice, and belonging like fine crystal hitting concrete in slow motion. She's not blood. Those words weren't meant for my ears. They slipped out in a hushed whisper from Sarah's lips as she stood by the magnificent 12-foot Christmas tree in her sprawling living room, talking quietly to her cousin Rebecca, while the rest of our extended family laughed and celebrated around us in blissful ignorance. Sarah, my daughter, my precious girl, my heart walking around outside my body, the child I raised from age 7 when her father Frank and I married 31 years ago in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. The little girl who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, her small body shaking like a frightened sparrow until I sang her to sleep with lullabies my own grandmother had sung to me. The woman I walked down the aisle on her wedding day because her biological mother had abandoned her years before like yesterday's newspaper, discarded without a second thought. She's not blood. I was carrying a heavy silver tray of my famous sugar cookies from the kitchen. The same recipe I'd inherited from my mother, perfected over decades, and taught Sarah to make when she was 12 years old, with flour in her hair and giggles bubbling up from her chest. The cookies she requested every Christmas without fail, the ones that had become synonymous with our family traditions. My hands trembled so violently when those words hit my ears that the ceramic plate nearly slipped from my arthritic grasp and crashed to the polished hardwood floor in a symphony of destruction. I managed to set the tray down carefully on the antique mahogany sideboard that had belonged to Frank's grandmother, my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird, desperate to escape this suffocating moment that felt like drowning in plain sight. The context seemed innocent enough on the surface, the kind of casual family conversation that happens at every holiday gathering. Sarah's cousin Rebecca was asking about family recipes, wondering which treasured traditions would be passed down to the grandchildren, which culinary legacies would survive into the next generation. They were discussing the importance of preserving family heritage, of maintaining connections to the past through food and ritual. That's when Sarah said it, so casually, so matter-of-factly, as if I were some temporary caretaker, a placeholder, rather than the woman who had bandaged her scraped knees with cartoon band-aids and kisses, stayed up all night when she had pneumonia at age 10, holding her burning body while she struggled to breathe, held her hair back when she was violently sick with morning sickness during her first pregnancy, and sacrificed my own dreams and ambitions to ensure she had every opportunity I could possibly provide. Well, Margaret has some wonderful recipes, Sarah had continued, her voice carrying easily across the room. But when it comes to actual family traditions, the ones that really matter, she's not blood, you know? I want to make sure we're preserving the recipes that came from our real family lineage. The words hit me like physical blows, each syllable a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I backed quietly into the hallway, pressing my spine against the cool wall, trying to make myself invisible, trying to disappear entirely. The sounds of Christmas, children's laughter echoing from the playroom where my grandchildren played with toys I had carefully chosen and wrapped. Adults sharing stories and memories I had helped create. The gentle clink of wine glasses filled with mulled cider I had spent hours preparing. Christmas carols playing softly from the expensive sound system Frank and I had given them as a housewarming gift. Suddenly felt like they were happening in another dimension, another world entirely. A world where I didn't belong, where I never had belonged, where I had been fooling myself for over 3 decades. The memories came flooding back like a dam had burst, overwhelming me with their intensity and startling clarity, each one now tainted with the knowledge that apparently none of it had mattered the way I thought it did. I remembered that first day with perfect, painful detail. Frank brought Sarah home to meet me on a crisp October afternoon in 1994. Her small hand clutched tightly in his much larger, calloused one. She had mousy brown hair in uneven pigtails that someone had obviously attempted to fix but failed miserably, and wore a faded yellow dress with tiny flowers on it that was too small for her rapidly growing frame, along with hand-me-down shoes with scuffed toes and worn soles that had clearly belonged to several children before her. Her biological mother, Linda, had left 6 months earlier with a man she had known for less than 3 weeks, a drifter named Tommy who promised her adventure and freedom from the suffocating responsibilities of motherhood. She'd left only a hastily scrawled note on the back of a grocery receipt saying she needed to find herself and couldn't be tied down by responsibilities anymore. The note was crumpled and stained with what looked like coffee rings, as careless as the woman who wrote it. Sarah had been living with Frank's elderly parents, George and Martha, in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment above the old hardware store downtown. They loved her with all their hearts, but they were both in their 70s, struggling with their own health issues and completely overwhelmed by a 7-year-old's boundless energy, constant questions, and the complex emotional needs of a child who had been abandoned by the one person who was supposed to love her unconditionally. "This is Margaret," Frank had said gently, kneeling down to Sarah's level on my front porch, his voice soft and encouraging. "She's going to be very special to us. Very special to you." Sarah had looked at me with eyes the color of storm clouds, cautious, guarded, filled with the kind of wariness that breaks your heart because no child should have to protect themselves so carefully. But beneath that protective wall, I could see a tiny flicker of hope she was trying desperately hard to hide behind emotional barriers built by abandonment, disappointment, and the crushing realization that the adults who were supposed to protect her weren't always reliable. I knelt down too, ignoring the sharp pain in my knees as they met the rough concrete, meeting her at eye level in a gesture I hoped would show her that I saw her as an equal, not just a child to be managed. "Hi, Sarah," I said as softly as I could manage, my voice barely above a whisper. "Would you like to help me bake some cookies? I make absolutely terrible cookies when I'm alone. They always come out lopsided and burnt around the edges. I really need an expert helper, and something tells me you might be just the person I'm looking for." For the first time since stepping onto my porch, she smiled. Just a tiny curve of her lips, barely visible, hesitant and fragile, but it was enough to crack my heart wide open and let this wounded little girl settle inside forever, making a home in the deepest chambers of my soul. That evening, after Frank had tucked her into the guest room that would soon become her permanent sanctuary, painted soft pink at her specific request, with glow-in-the-dark stars carefully arranged on the ceiling to form real constellations I had researched at the library, I lay awake in my bed making silent, sacred promises to the universe, to God, to whatever force governs love and family and the bonds that truly matter. I would love this child as if she had grown beneath my heart for 9 months, as if I had felt her first kicks and counted her tiny fingers and toes in the delivery room. I would never, ever let her feel unwanted or abandoned again, not while there was breath in my body and love in my heart. I would be the mother she deserved, the mother she desperately needed, the mother I knew I could be if given the chance. I would give her roots and wings, security and freedom, unconditional love and gentle guidance. And God help me, I kept those promises with every fiber of my being. Lord knows I kept every single one of them with a devotion that consumed me completely and joyfully. When Sarah came down with chickenpox at age 9, angry red spots covering every inch of her small body from her scalp to the soles of her feet, I took 2 full weeks off work without pay to care for her. Money was tight. Frank worked construction, and weather often kept him from earning steady wages, and my job at the department store barely covered our basic expenses. But there was never a question in my mind about where I needed to be. I turned our living room into a recovery haven, hanging soft sheets over the windows to dim the harsh sunlight that hurt her fever-bright eyes. I read every book in the house twice while she recovered, acting out different characters with exaggerated voices that made her giggle despite feeling miserable. When we ran out of books, I made up elaborate stories about brave princesses and magical kingdoms, about little girls who overcame great challenges and discovered they were stronger than they ever imagined. I bathed her gently in cool oatmeal baths to soothe the itching, painted her fingernails with clear polish to discourage scratching, and stayed awake through the long nights when the fever made her restless and afraid. When she finally turned the corner and started feeling better, the first thing she said was, "Mama Margaret, can we read just one more story?" Mama Margaret, not just Margaret, Mama Margaret. The name wrapped around my heart like a warm embrace and never let go. When she wanted to quit piano lessons at age 11 because she said she wasn't good enough and would never be as talented as the other kids in her class, I refused to let her give up on herself. Mrs. Henderson, her teacher, was a stern woman who believed in discipline over encouragement, and Sarah came home from lessons feeling defeated and inadequate week after week. I found a different teacher, Mrs. Sophia, a gentle Italian woman who understood that music should bring joy, not tears. But the lessons were expensive, and we had to sacrifice other things to afford them. I started buying generic groceries and sewing patches on Frank's work clothes instead of replacing them. I gave up my weekly trip to the beauty salon and learned to cut and color my own hair. Every single evening for 6 months, I sat beside Sarah on the piano bench, helping her practice scales and simple melodies until her small fingers found their confidence on the black and white keys. I celebrated every small improvement, every correctly played note, every moment when her face lit up with the joy of creating something beautiful. The day she played her first recital piece flawlessly, for Elise, which she had practiced until she could play it in her sleep, I cried tears of pure, overwhelming pride. She played with such emotion, such technical skill, that several people in the audience were moved to tears themselves. Afterward, she ran to me in her frilly white dress and threw her arms around my waist. "Did you hear that, Mama Margaret? Did you hear how beautiful it was?" "It was perfect, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "You were absolutely perfect." I taught her to drive in my old blue Buick when she turned 15, a car that had seen better days but was paid for and reliable. We spent countless Saturday mornings in the parking lot of the abandoned shopping center, me white-knuckling the passenger door handle while she learned the difference between the brake and the gas pedal, the art of gentle steering, the patience required for parallel parking. She was a nervous driver at first, jumping at every sound, overcorrecting every small mistake. I stayed calm and encouraging even when she accidentally drove over the curb at the grocery store, leaving tire tracks in the landscaping. Even when she hit a mailbox during her driving test and came home sobbing with disappointment. Even when it took her 3 attempts to finally pass and get her license. Driving isn't just about following rules, I told her after a particularly frustrating lesson. It's about confidence, about trusting yourself to make good decisions. You're going to be a wonderful driver because you're careful and thoughtful. Those are the qualities that matter most. When she finally passed her test and came home waving her temporary license in the air, we celebrated with homemade ice cream sundaes and stayed up late planning all the places she would drive herself once she saved enough money for her own car. High school brought new challenges. Sarah was academically gifted but socially awkward, struggling to find her place among teenagers who seemed so confident and self-assured. She came home crying more than once because someone had made fun of her thrift store clothes or her serious demeanor. She was particularly hurt when a group of popular girls called her the weird orphan girl within earshot, not knowing or caring that their words would cut so deeply. I held her while she cried, my own heart breaking for the pain she was experiencing. "You are not weird, and you are not an orphan," I told her firmly. "You are unique, and intelligent, and kind, and worthy of respect. Some people are intimidated by those qualities, so they try to tear down what they don't understand. But that says nothing about you and everything about them." I started volunteering at the school, helping with fundraisers and chaperoning dances, partly to stay involved in her life, and partly to keep an eye on the social dynamics that were causing her so much pain. I got to know her teachers, advocated for her when she needed extra support, and celebrated every academic achievement as if she had won the Nobel Prize. Her senior year chemistry project nearly broke both of us. The assignment was to create a detailed model of molecular structures and write a comprehensive paper explaining chemical bonds and reactions. Sarah, being a perfectionist, wanted everything to be flawless. We stayed up until 2 and 3 in the morning for weeks, both of us covered in poster paint and rubber cement, surrounded by cardboard models and research books borrowed from the library. I learned more about chemistry that semester than I ever thought possible, quizzing her on periodic table elements while she painted intricate atomic structures. When she got frustrated and wanted to give up, I reminded her of all the other challenges she had overcome. When I got frustrated with the complexity of the project, she patiently explained concepts until they made sense to me too. The night before it was due, we both fell asleep at the kitchen table, surrounded by the completed project that represented weeks of shared effort and determination. When she got a B+ on that project, not the A she had hoped for, but still an excellent grade, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I couldn't have done this without you, Mama Margaret," she said, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. "Thank you for never giving up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." When she graduated high school as valedictorian, earning a full scholarship to the state university, I cried harder than any of the biological mothers around me. I was so proud, I thought my chest might burst with the sheer force of my joy and love. During her graduation speech, she thanked her teachers, her friends, and my parents, Frank and Margaret, who believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. My parents. She called us her parents, publicly and without hesitation. The transition to college was difficult for both of us. Sarah had never been away from home for more than a few days, and I had never experienced the empty nest syndrome that came with watching your child spread their wings and fly toward their own future. We wrote letters every week. This was before email became common, and I sent care packages filled with homemade cookies, warm socks, and little notes of encouragement. When she called me at midnight during finals week of her freshman year, sobbing because she was overwhelmed and scared and homesick, I didn't hesitate. I drove 4 hours through a fierce snowstorm, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I navigated treacherous roads, just to hold her and remind her how strong and capable she was. I found her curled up in her dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and crumpled tissues, looking like the lost little girl I had first met all those years ago. We spent the entire weekend together. I helped her organize her study schedule, brought her favorite comfort foods, and reminded her of all the obstacles she had already overcome in her young life. "You survived your mother leaving," I told her as we sat on her narrow dorm bed, her head on my shoulder. "You survived starting over in a new family, new school, new life. You survived chickenpox and piano recitals and chemistry projects and teenage heartbreak. You can survive college finals too. I believe in you completely." She graduated college with honors 4 years later, majoring in elementary education with a minor in music therapy. I was in the front row at her graduation ceremony, cheering louder than anyone else when they called her name. She had decided to become a teacher because, in her words, "I want to be for other kids what you were for me, someone who believes in them unconditionally." During her college years, she brought home boyfriends for my approval, called me for advice about everything from career decisions to friendship drama, and included me in every major milestone. When she started dating Michael during her junior year, she was nervous about introducing him to us. "What if he doesn't like our family?" she asked me during one of our weekly phone calls. "If he doesn't appreciate how wonderful our family is," I replied, "then he's not the right person for you. You deserve someone who loves all of you, including the people who raised you and shaped you into the amazing woman you've become." Michael turned out to be perfect for her, kind, intelligent, ambitious, and completely smitten with Sarah. More importantly, he treated Frank and me with genuine respect and affection, never making us feel like obstacles to overcome or background characters in their love story. When he asked for our blessing before proposing, I cried with joy. When Sarah called to tell me he had proposed on the beach where they had their first date, I cried again. When she asked me to help her plan the wedding, I felt honored beyond words. The wedding planning process took over a year and brought us even closer together. We spent countless Saturday afternoons looking at venues, tasting cakes, trying on dresses, and discussing every detail from flowers to music to the wording of the invitations. Sarah wanted everything to be perfect, and I wanted to help make her dreams come true. The most emotional moment came when we were addressing invitations and we got to the question of how to handle her biological mother. Linda had made contact a few years earlier, sending awkward cards on birthdays and Christmas, but had never tried to rebuild a real relationship with Sarah. "I don't want her there," Sarah said quietly, staring at the elegant invitation in her hands. "I know that might sound harsh, but she wasn't there for any of the important moments in my life. She doesn't get to show up for this one just because it's convenient for her. It's your wedding," I told her. "You get to decide who belongs there and who doesn't. You don't owe anyone a relationship they haven't earned." "You're walking me down the aisle, right?" she asked, even though we had already discussed it multiple times. "You and Dad together? If that's what you want, sweetheart. Nothing would make me prouder." The wedding day was absolutely perfect. Sarah was radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, which I had spent weeks carefully altering to fit her perfectly. When Frank and I walked her down the aisle together, I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. This beautiful, accomplished, kind-hearted woman was my daughter in every way that mattered. During the reception, Sarah gave a speech thanking everyone who had supported her and Michael. She spoke about Frank teaching her the value of hard work and integrity. She spoke about her grandparents' unconditional love during those difficult early years. And then she turned to me. "But most of all," she said, her voice breaking slightly with emotion, "I want to thank my mom, Margaret, who chose to love me when she didn't have to, who never made me feel like a burden or an obligation, who taught me that family isn't about DNA. It's about showing up every single day with love and patience and unwavering support. Mom, you didn't just raise me. You saved me. You made me who I am today, and I love you more than words can express." There wasn't a dry eye in the house, including mine. I felt so validated, so appreciated, so completely loved and accepted as her mother. How could I have known that 15 years later, those feelings would be shattered by 3 carelessly spoken words? Frank's death 5 years ago was the darkest period of my life since my parents' death when I was 8. He had a massive heart attack while working in our garden on a beautiful spring morning, gone before the paramedics could even attempt to save him. Sarah was my lifeline during that devastating grief, the only thing that kept me anchored to the world of the living. She held my trembling hand throughout the funeral service, helped me sort through 42 years' worth of shared possessions when I couldn't bear to touch his things alone, called me every single Sunday without fail just to check on my emotional and physical well-being. She named me as her emergency contact on every important document, invited me to every family gathering and celebration, included me in every major decision about her growing family. When her first child was born, my first grandchild, little Emma, Sarah insisted that I be in the delivery room along with Michael. "You're her grandmother," she said simply. "You belong here." When Emma took her first steps, Sarah called me immediately so I could witness the milestone over video chat. When Emma said her first word, which was Gamma for grandma, Sarah cried with joy and immediately sent me a recording. I was Emma's primary babysitter, the one Sarah trusted completely with her most precious possession. I taught Emma the same lullabies I had sung to Sarah, read her the same bedtime stories, baked the same cookies that had become our family tradition. Emma called me Gamma and ran to me with the same enthusiasm she showed her biological grandparents. When Sarah's son Jake was born 2 years later, the pattern repeated. I was present for his birth, his first steps, his first words. I was the grandmother who remembered every milestone, who showed up for every school play and birthday party, who provided emergency childcare when Sarah was sick or overwhelmed. But she's not blood. The phrase had been echoing in my mind as I stood in that hallway, listening to my family, my chosen family, celebrate Christmas without any idea that my world was crumbling just a few feet away from their joy and laughter and love. I thought about all the countless times over the years I had defended our relationship to others, usually well-meaning but thoughtless people who didn't understand how families could be created through choice rather than biology. When nosy neighbors asked if Sarah was really my daughter, I would smile politely and say that love makes a family, not genetics. When distant relatives occasionally made awkward comments about step-families and the difference between real children and bonus children, I brushed them off with confidence, secure in the knowledge that Sarah and I had something authentic and unbreakable. When other mothers at school events sometimes excluded me from conversations about real parenting experiences, I held my head high and focused on the relationships that mattered. When Sarah's biological mother briefly tried to reconnect during Sarah's college years, and some people suggested that Linda deserved a chance to be Sarah's real mother again, I supported Sarah's decision to maintain boundaries while quietly trusting in the bond we had built together. But what if it had all been desperately, pathetically one-sided? What if, in her heart of hearts, despite all her words of love and gratitude, I had always been simply Frank's wife who happened to raise her rather than her actual mother? What if all my fierce love and devotion and sacrifice had been categorized as something less than real maternal love in the place where it mattered most, in Sarah's own heart and mind? The thought was so devastating that I had to grip the wall to keep from sliding to the floor in despair. I slipped my heavy winter coat from the hall closet, moving as quietly as possible to avoid drawing attention to my departure. I walked out into the bitter December evening without saying goodbye to anyone, without explanations or excuses or the polite social rituals that usually governed my behavior. The cold air bit at my cheeks and burned my lungs, but it felt cleaner somehow than the suffocating warmth inside that house where I apparently didn't truly belong, where I never had belonged despite decades of believing otherwise. The drive home was a blur of twinkling Christmas lights and tears that wouldn't stop falling no matter how hard I tried to compose myself. I kept hearing those words, turning them over in my mind like a sharp stone I couldn't stop touching, despite how much it hurt to feel its jagged edges cutting into my fingers. She's not blood. The phrase played on repeat, accompanied by a slideshow of memories that now felt tainted and questionable. Had Sarah's expressions of love always been tinged with obligation rather than genuine affection? Had her gratitude been a form of politeness rather than heartfelt appreciation? Had I been so desperate to be needed and loved that I had misinterpreted mere tolerance for genuine maternal bond? At home, I sat in Frank's old brown leather recliner, the one Sarah had begged me not to throw away after he died, because Dad loved that chair and it still smells like his cologne, and sometimes I sit in it, when I miss him, and let myself completely fall apart in a way I hadn't since Frank's funeral. I cried for the little girl who had needed a mother and found one in me, or so I had believed. I cried for the woman I had loved unconditionally, who apparently saw me as something less than family, something temporary and replaceable. But mostly, I cried for myself, for the devastating realization that all my love, all my sacrifice, all my unwavering devotion had been categorized as somehow lesser because it wasn't written in DNA. How could someone I had loved so completely, so unconditionally, see our relationship as fundamentally different from a real mother-daughter bond? How could all those years of daily devotion, all those moments of shared joy and sorrow, all those times when I had put her needs before my own without hesitation, how could all of that be reduced to "she's not blood" in a casual conversation about family recipes? Sarah called the next morning, her voice filled with concern and confusion. "Mom?" she said, and even that word felt different now, hollow somehow, like an empty title rather than a reflection of our true relationship. "Are you okay? You just disappeared last night without saying anything to anyone. Everyone was worried about you. Michael thought maybe you were having chest pains or something serious." I almost told her what I had overheard. The words were right there on the tip of my tongue, ready to tumble out with all the hurt and confusion and betrayal behind them. I wanted to ask her directly if I had been fooling myself all these years, if our relationship was as meaningful to her as it was to me, if she truly saw me as her mother or just as Frank's wife who had done a good job filling in. But what would be the point? She had spoken her truth, her honest feelings, in what she thought was a private conversation. Making her feel guilty about it wouldn't change how she really felt deep down in her heart. It wouldn't transform me into the blood family she apparently valued more highly. It would only create awkwardness and artificial reassurances that we would both know weren't entirely genuine. "I wasn't feeling well," I said instead, my voice sounding strange and distant even to my own ears. "I just needed to get home to my own bed, to my own space. You know how crowds can sometimes be overwhelming, especially when you're not feeling your best." She offered to come over immediately, to bring homemade chicken soup, to take care of me the way I had taken care of her so many times throughout her childhood and beyond. The irony wasn't lost on me. This woman who didn't consider me blood was willing to mother me in my time of need, to show me the same kind of care and concern I had always shown her. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured her, using the endearment that had always come so naturally. "I just need some rest. I'll call you in a few days when I'm feeling better." Over the following weeks and months, I found myself obsessively analyzing every interaction we'd ever had, combing through decades of memories and looking for signs I had somehow missed over the years. Had she always held part of herself back from me? Had there always been an invisible barrier I was too blind to see? Had I been fooling myself about the depth of our bond, interpreting politeness and gratitude as genuine love and connection? I remembered the time she was 16 and had gotten into trouble at school for skipping classes. When the principal called to inform me, Sarah was terrified that I would be disappointed in her, that I might decide she was too much trouble and send her away like her biological mother had done. The fear in her eyes had been real and heartbreaking. "I'm not going anywhere," I had told her firmly, holding her face in my hands. "You could burn down the school and I would still love you. You could make 1,000 mistakes and I would still be here. That's what mothers do. We love our children unconditionally, no matter what." At the time, I thought my words had comforted her, had helped her understand the permanence of our bond. Now I wondered if she had heard something different, if she had categorized my promise as the obligation of a stepmother rather than the devotion of a real mother. I thought about all the times she had introduced me to her friends, her teachers, her colleagues. "This is my mom, Margaret," she would say with apparent pride and affection. But had she ever clarified to them later that I wasn't her real mom, just the woman who had raised her? Had she felt the need to explain our relationship to people who mattered to her? The uncertainty was eating me alive, poisoning every happy memory and making me question every interaction we'd shared. I canceled our regular Sunday dinners, claiming I was tired or too busy with other obligations. I stopped calling her every few days just to check in and hear about her life. I needed space and distance to figure out who I was if I wasn't Sarah's mother. Not really, not in her eyes, not in the way that apparently mattered most to her sense of family identity. The truth was, I felt like a complete and utter fool. All those years of fierce, protective love. All those sleepless nights I had worried about her the way only a mother worries, pacing the floor when she was out past curfew, lying awake when she was sick, feeling her pain as if it were my own when she was heartbroken or disappointed. All those moments of overwhelming pride that had swelled in my chest when she succeeded at something or overcame a challenge. The kind of pride that felt like it might split me open with its intensity. Had it all been presumptuous of me? Had I been playing a role she never actually asked me to play? Had my maternal instincts been nothing more than the well-meaning interference of a woman who was trying too hard to be something she could never truly be? The questions tormented me during the long winter nights, when the house felt too quiet and too empty and too full of memories that now seemed suspect. I would lie in bed replaying conversations, analyzing tone and word choice, looking for clues that might reveal Sarah's true feelings about our relationship. But as the weeks slowly passed and the initial sharp pain began to dull into something more manageable, something I could carry without it destroying me completely, I started to see things from a different perspective. The change didn't happen overnight. It was gradual, like the slow transition from winter to spring, barely noticeable at first, but eventually impossible to ignore. I remembered Mrs. Chen from down the street, a wise woman who had raised her grandson Tommy after her daughter died tragically in a car accident when he was only 3 years old. Mrs. Chen had loved that boy with a devotion that was beautiful to witness, and Tommy had grown up calling her Mama and treating her with the respect and affection due to a beloved parent. "Blood doesn't make family, Margaret," she had told me once while we worked side by side in our gardens, her hands gentle with the tender seedlings we were planting. "Love makes family. Real, deep, committed love that shows up every day regardless of convenience or obligation. And you love that girl something fierce. Anyone with eyes can see it, and anyone with sense can see that she loves you right back." I thought about my dear friend Dorothy, who had adopted 3 children from foster care over the years and loved them with a devotion that was absolutely breathtaking to witness. Those children adored her, called her mom with genuine warmth and obvious affection, and never seemed to question whether their family was real or not. They had been created not by biology, but by choice, by legal paperwork and emotional commitment and daily acts of love. I thought about my own grandmother, my mother's mother, who had raised me after my parents died in a house fire when I was 8 years old. Grandma Rose had been more of a mother to me than my biological mother ever could have been, and I had never once questioned the authenticity of her love or my place in her heart. She had chosen to take me in when she could have let the state place me with strangers. She had shaped me into the woman I became, and her influence was woven through every aspect of my character and values. Had Grandma Rose ever worried that I didn't see her as my real mother figure? Had she ever doubted the legitimacy of her role in my life because she hadn't given birth to me? The thought seemed absurd now, because her love had been so obviously genuine, so clearly transformative in my life. Maybe the problem wasn't that Sarah didn't see me as blood. Maybe the problem was that I had been desperately seeking validation for a love that needed no validation whatsoever, that stood perfectly well on its own merits. I had spent 26 years being Sarah's mother, not because DNA demanded it, not because legal documents required it, but because my heart demanded it. I had chosen to love her completely and unconditionally, and that choice had shaped both of our lives in profound, beautiful ways. The fact that she might categorize our relationship differently than I did didn't diminish what I had given or what we had shared together over nearly 3 decades. It just meant we experienced our connection from different perspectives, and that was okay. It had to be okay, because the alternative was allowing her perspective to invalidate my own experience of love and motherhood. 3 months after that devastating Christmas, I made a life-changing decision that would alter the course of my remaining years. I was going to stop waiting for Sarah to see me exactly the way I wanted to be seen, and start focusing on building a rich, fulfilling life that didn't depend on anyone else's definition of family or validation of my worth as a woman and mother figure. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying. For so many years, my identity had been wrapped up in being Sarah's mother, in being needed and appreciated and central to her life. Who was I if I wasn't desperately trying to earn that role? Who could I become if I stopped defining myself through other people's perceptions of me? I joined a support group for step-parents and adoptive parents that met every Thursday evening in the basement of our community center. The group was led by Dr. Patricia Williams, a licensed therapist who had herself adopted 4 children and understood the unique challenges we faced. Sitting in that circle of mismatched metal folding chairs, surrounded by people who understood my pain intimately, I discovered I wasn't alone in feeling like my love was somehow considered second class or less legitimate than biological bonds. There was Janet, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s who had raised her husband's 3 children for 15 years after their mother died in a car accident, only to be completely excluded from family photos when the children decided they wanted to honor their biological mother's memory by pretending Janet had never existed. "I gave them everything," she said through tears during one of our sessions. "I drove them to soccer practice and piano lessons, helped with homework every night, stayed up with them when they were sick, celebrated every birthday and graduation. But when it came time to make their wedding albums, I was erased like I never mattered at all." There was Robert, a gentleman who had adopted his son Marcus from foster care when the boy was 5 years old and had spent the next 13 years being the only father Marcus had ever known. But when Marcus turned 18 and reconnected with his birth family through social media, he suddenly seemed to see Robert as nothing more than a placeholder who had served his purpose and was no longer needed. "He calls his birth father Dad now," Robert shared with the group, his voice breaking. "The man who abandoned him, who never paid a dime of child support, who never showed up for a single birthday or Christmas. That's the man he calls Dad. And I'm just Robert now, like those 13 years of fathering meant nothing at all." There was Linda, whose stepdaughter Jessica still called her by her first name even after 20 years of daily mothering, bedtime stories, packed lunches, and unconditional support. "I don't expect her to forget her biological mother," Linda explained during one particularly emotional session. "I would never want that. But after 2 decades of showing up every single day, it hurts that I'm still just Linda, not Mom or even stepmom. It's like I'm a family friend who happens to live in the same house. There was Carlos, who had raised his partner's daughter from infancy after her mother died in childbirth, only to have his legal rights questioned by extended family members who didn't approve of his relationship. "I'm the only parent she's ever known," he said quietly. "I taught her to walk, to talk, to read. I've been there for every scraped knee and broken heart. But because we're not related by blood, and because some people don't accept my relationship with her father, they act like I'm just a babysitter with no real claim to love her." But there was also incredible healing in that room, a sense of recognition and validation that I had been desperately craving without even realizing it. There was understanding that the love we had given was real and valuable and transformative, regardless of how it was received or categorized by others. There was acknowledgement that we could not control how other people defined family, but we absolutely could control how we defined ourselves and our own worth. Dr. Williams helped us understand that our feelings of inadequacy and illegitimacy were common among people who had chosen to love children who weren't biologically their own. "Our society places such emphasis on blood relationships," she explained during one of our sessions, "that we often forget that chosen love can be just as powerful, just as transformative, just as real as biological love. In fact, it can be even more meaningful because it's not based on obligation or genetic programming. It's based on a conscious decision to commit your heart and your life to another person's well-being." She encouraged us to create our own definitions of family, our own traditions and celebrations that honored the relationships we had built rather than mourning the recognition we felt we deserved from others. "You can't force someone to see you as family," she said gently, "but you can choose to see yourself as worthy of love and respect, regardless of how others categorize your role in their lives." Through the support group, I began to understand that my worth as a mother figure, as a human being, wasn't dependent on Sarah's acknowledgement of my role. I had spent 26 years pouring love into her life, and that love had shaped both of us in beautiful ways. The fact that she might define our relationship differently than I didn't erase the reality of what I had given or the impact I had had on her development into the wonderful woman she had become. I started volunteering at the local literacy center 3 days a week, teaching adults to read. There's something profoundly moving about watching a 60-year-old man sound out his first complete sentence, or seeing a grandmother finally able to read bedtime stories to her grandchildren after years of pretending she could see the words on the page. These people became part of my chosen family, bound not by blood or law, but by shared purpose, mutual respect, and genuine care for one another's growth and success. My student Maria, a 45-year-old woman from Guatemala who cleaned offices at night to support her 3 children, cried the day she read her first English paragraph without help. "Mrs. Margaret," she said, gripping my hands tightly, "you have given me the gift of words. Now I can help my children with their homework. Now I can read the letters from their school. You have changed my whole family's future." Another student, James, was a 72-year-old man who had been too embarrassed to admit he couldn't read until his wife died, and he realized he couldn't manage basic tasks like reading prescription bottles or filling out forms. The day he read his first book, a simple story about a man learning to fish, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I never thought I'd live to see the day when words would make sense to me. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." These relationships felt pure and uncomplicated in a way that my relationship with Sarah no longer did. My students appreciated my help without reservation, without categorizing my care as somehow less valuable because we weren't related. They needed what I had to offer, and I needed the sense of purpose and fulfillment that came from making a real difference in their lives. I reconnected with old friends I had let drift away during my years of intensive mothering. Women I had known since high school who welcomed me back with open arms and understanding hearts. Gloria, my college roommate, had never married or had children, and she helped me remember who I had been before I became so completely absorbed in Sarah's needs and development. "You were always the nurturing one," Gloria reminded me over coffee one afternoon. "Even in college, you were the one taking care of everyone else, bringing soup when we were sick, staying up all night to help with difficult assignments, making sure everyone felt included and valued. That's just who you are, Margaret. It's not something you learned from being Sarah's mother. It's something you brought to being Sarah's mother. I took that watercolor painting class I had always wanted to take, discovering a talent I never knew I possessed. There was something deeply satisfying about mixing colors on the palette, about watching beautiful scenes emerge from blank paper through patience and practice. My instructor, Mrs. Patterson, was a retired art teacher who had spent 40 years encouraging students to find their creative voices. Art isn't about creating masterpieces, she told our small class of middle-aged beginners. It's about expressing what's inside you, about finding beauty in the process of creation itself. Don't worry about whether anyone else likes what you make. Worry about whether it brings you joy. I painted landscapes mostly, scenes from my childhood, memories of places that had brought me peace. But I also painted portraits of the people who had shaped my life. My grandmother Rose, who had saved me after my parents died. Frank, whose love had given me the family I'd always dreamed of. Even Sarah as a little girl, because despite everything, those memories of raising her were still precious to me. I planted an elaborate garden that was entirely for my own pleasure and satisfaction, filled with flowers I loved regardless of whether anyone else found them beautiful or practical. I grew roses and peonies and delphiniums, plants that required careful attention and rewarded that care with stunning blooms. I grew vegetables too, tomatoes and cucumbers and herbs, partly for the satisfaction of nurturing things from seed to harvest, and partly because the fresh produce reminded me of my grandmother's garden from my childhood. Working in the soil with my hands, feeling the sun on my face and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and productive, I began to remember who I was beyond my role as Sarah's mother. I was a woman who had survived tremendous losses and still found ways to create beauty. I was someone who could nurture plants and people and ideas into flourishing. I was worthy of love and respect not because of what I had done for others, but because of who I was at my core. Sarah noticed the changes in me almost immediately, and her response revealed something I hadn't expected. She started calling more often, dropping by my house unannounced, asking repeatedly if I was upset with her about something. There was an anxiety in her voice that I had never heard before, an uncertainty that suggested my withdrawal had affected her more than she wanted to admit. "You seem so different lately, Mom," she said one sunny afternoon in late spring, finding me in my garden with dirt under my fingernails and paint still drying in my silver hair from my morning art class. "You seem lighter somehow, but also more distant. You seem happy, but you don't seem to need us anymore. I don't understand what's changed." The word need struck me as particularly telling. Had our relationship been based more on my need to be needed than on genuine mutual affection? Had she grown comfortable with my constant availability, my eager willingness to drop everything for her and her family? "I am happy," I told her honestly, sitting back on my heels and really looking at her for the first time in months. "I'm genuinely happy in a way I haven't been in years. I've discovered that I'm still me, even when I'm not actively being someone's mother. But we don't spend nearly as much time together anymore," she said, and for the first time I heard real uncertainty in her voice, a vulnerability I hadn't noticed before. "You don't call as often. You don't come over every weekend. You're always busy with other things. Did I do something wrong? Did I hurt you somehow?" The directness of her question caught me off guard. Part of me wanted to tell her about the Christmas conversation, to explain how those 3 words had shattered my sense of belonging in her life. But another part of me recognized that bringing it up now would only create guilt and defensiveness on both sides. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said gently, setting down my gardening tools to give her my full attention. "I just realized I was holding on to you too tightly, trying to fit into a space that wasn't really designed for me. You're a grown woman with your own life, your own family, your own way of seeing and understanding the world. I was trying to force something that needed to happen naturally, or maybe not at all." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked exactly like the 7-year-old girl who used to cry when she thought she had disappointed me. "That's not true, Mom. You're my mother. You raised me when no one else would or could. You're the one who taught me how to be strong, how to love unconditionally, how to never give up on the people who matter. You're the one who made me who I am today." "I know I raised you, sweetheart," I replied. my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. And I'm incredibly proud of that. It was the greatest privilege and joy of my life. But I also know that family means different things to different people, and that's perfectly okay. What matters is that we love each other deeply, not how we choose to label that love or define our relationship. We talked for hours that day, sitting in my garden as the sun moved across the sky and the shadows lengthened around us. She told me things she had never shared before, feelings and fears and confusions that had been weighing on her for years. She told me how guilty she felt about her biological mother, how she sometimes felt disloyal for loving me when her real mother was still alive somewhere out there, probably struggling with her own regrets and losses. She told me she was afraid that calling me her mother somehow diminished the biological sacrifice her birth mother had made in carrying her for 9 months and bringing her into the world. "I know Linda abandoned me," Sarah said, using her biological mother's name carefully, as if it might break something fragile. "I know she chose to leave rather than figure out how to be a parent. But she's still the reason I exist, and sometimes I feel like I'm betraying her by loving you so completely." She told me about the confusion she felt when people asked about her real parents, how she never knew how to answer without feeling like she was dishonoring someone who mattered to her. "If I say you're my real mother, it feels like I'm erasing Linda completely, like I'm pretending she never existed. But if I try to explain the whole complicated story, people look at me like our family is somehow less legitimate than families that are created through biology." I understood then that her whispered words at Christmas hadn't been about minimizing my role in her life. They had been about her own complicated feelings about identity, loyalty, and what it means to belong to someone. She was trying to navigate emotional waters I had never had to navigate, trying to honor multiple relationships that felt contradictory in her heart and mind. "I've never known how to talk about this with you," she continued, tears streaming down her face now. "Because I was afraid it would hurt your feelings, afraid you would think I didn't appreciate everything you've done for me. But the truth is, I think about Linda sometimes and wonder what would have happened if she had stayed, if she had figured out how to be a mother. And then I feel guilty for even thinking about it, because you're the one who actually did the work of raising me." Her honesty was both painful and healing. It hurt to hear that she sometimes wondered about an alternative life with her biological mother. But it also helped me understand that her feelings weren't about my inadequacy as a mother figure. They were about her own complex relationship with identity and belonging. "You don't owe me your exclusive love," I told her, reaching out to take her hands in mine. "Love isn't a finite resource that gets used up if you spread it around. You can love me as your mother and still wonder about Linda as your biological mother. You can be grateful for how I raised you and still grieve for the relationship you never got to have with her. Those feelings don't cancel each other out." She cried harder then, the kind of deep, cathartic tears that come when someone finally feels permission to acknowledge difficult emotions they've been carrying alone. "I love you so much, Mom," she said through her tears. "I love you as my mother, my real mother, the mother who matters. But I also carry this sadness about Linda, this wondering about what might have been. Does that make me a terrible person?" "It makes you human," I assured her, pulling her into the kind of tight hug I used to give her when she was little and the world felt too big and scary. "It makes you a person with a big heart who can hold multiple truths at the same time. I'm proud of you for being able to acknowledge those complicated feelings instead of pretending they don't exist." But understanding her perspective didn't erase the valuable lesson I had learned over the past few months. I could love Sarah completely and unconditionally without needing her to love me back in exactly the way I wanted to be loved. I could be proud of my mothering without requiring recognition as a real mother. I could choose family without demanding that my choices be reciprocated in the same form or with the same intensity. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone else's definition of my role in their life. I was a good mother because I had chosen to love completely and show up consistently, not because Sarah or anyone else acknowledged that truth. Over the following months, our relationship began to evolve into something healthier and more sustainable. I stopped being constantly available for every minor crisis or routine need, which initially worried Sarah but ultimately helped her develop more independence and self-reliance. I continued to be present for the important moments, birthdays, holidays, school plays, medical appointments. But I also maintained my own interests and commitments. Sarah seemed to appreciate this new dynamic more than I had expected. "I like seeing you happy and fulfilled in your own life," she told me one evening when she stopped by to find me preparing for a painting class exhibition. "I was starting to worry that you had given up too much of yourself to take care of our family. It's good to see you being Margaret, not just Mom." The comment revealed something I hadn't fully understood before. My constant availability and eager self-sacrifice hadn't just been overwhelming for me. It had also been a source of guilt and concern for Sarah, who worried that she was somehow responsible for my lack of independent interests and friendships. When summer arrived, I organized a trip to visit my college friend Gloria, who lived in Maine near the ocean. It was the first time in 26 years that I had taken a vacation that wasn't centered around Sarah's family or their needs. Sarah was initially hurt that I hadn't invited her and the grandchildren, but she eventually admitted that she was also proud of me for prioritizing my own desires. "Have fun, Mom," she said as she drove me to the airport, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. "You deserve to have adventures and experiences that are just for you. Take lots of pictures and tell me all about it when you get back." The week in Maine was transformative. Gloria and I walked on the beach every morning, visited art galleries and local museums, ate fresh lobster and read books in comfortable silence. I felt like I was rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. The part that loved to travel and explore new places, the part that enjoyed intellectual conversations about books and politics and philosophy, the part that could be completely content in my own company. "You seem different," Gloria observed on our last evening together as we watched the sunset from her deck. "More settled in your own skin. More confident in who you are apart from your role as Sarah's mother." "I think I finally understand that being a good mother doesn't mean disappearing into the role completely," I replied. "I can love Sarah deeply and still maintain my own identity, my own interests, my own sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on her validation." This year, I decided to host Christmas at my house for the first time since Frank died. The decision felt both significant and natural, a way of reclaiming my own space and traditions while still maintaining connection with the people I loved. I invited my literacy students who had nowhere else to go for the holiday, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere for people who had become like family to me. Maria brought her 3 children, who were now excelling in school, partly because their mother could finally help them with their homework. James brought his sister, who had driven up from Florida to spend the holiday with him, and was amazed at how much his life had changed since learning to read. I invited my art class friends, women who had become like sisters to me over the months we had spent learning to paint together. They brought homemade dishes and bottles of wine and stories of their own families and struggles and triumphs. I invited my neighbor Mrs. Chen and her grandson Tommy, who was now in college but still called her Grandma, with obvious affection and respect. Mrs. Chen brought her famous dumplings and wisdom earned through decades of loving people who weren't connected to her by blood. And yes, I invited Sarah and her family, Michael, Emma, and Jake, because despite everything, they were still precious to me, and I wanted them to be part of this celebration I was creating. But I also invited my support group friends and their families, the people who understood what it meant to love without the guarantee of being loved back in equal measure, who knew the particular challenges and joys of chosen family relationships. The result was beautiful chaos, exactly what I wanted my life to look like. My small house was filled with laughter and conversation in multiple languages, children playing games with adults they had just met, teenagers helping elderly students read Christmas cards aloud, and a wonderful mixing of people who might never have encountered each other in any other context. Sarah helped me in the kitchen, just like she had as a child, and we fell into our old rhythm of working together efficiently and companionably. At one point, she paused in her chopping of vegetables to look around at the crowded, joyful scene in my living room. "This is incredible, Mom," she said with genuine admiration. "Look at all these people who love you, who you've made a difference for. You've created your own family here, haven't you?" "I've created a community," I corrected gently. "A chosen family of people who appreciate each other and show up for each other. It's not a replacement for our family. It's an addition to it." Later that evening, when most of the guests had gone home and Sarah was helping me load the dishwasher. She hugged me from behind while I was putting away the last of the serving dishes. "Thank you, Mom," she said quietly, and her voice carried a depth of emotion I hadn't heard in years. "For everything. For raising me with so much love and patience. For never making me feel like I had to choose between loving you and understanding where I came from. For letting me figure out who I am without pressure or judgment. And for showing me tonight what it looks like to build a life filled with people who truly appreciate you." I leaned back into her embrace and felt completely whole, not because she had finally given me the validation I once craved so desperately, but because I no longer needed external validation to know my own worth and the value of what I had given. "Thank you," I whispered back, "for letting me love you exactly as you are, for all these years, and for becoming such a wonderful woman that I'm proud to have played a part in raising you." That night, after everyone had gone home and I was sitting in Frank's old chair with a cup of tea and the satisfaction of a day well lived, I thought about how dramatically different this Christmas felt from the one 11 months earlier. Last year, I had been desperate to belong, to be seen as real family, to have my love recognized and validated by others in the way I thought I needed. This year, I knew something far more valuable and sustainable. I knew that love doesn't require recognition to be real and transformative. I knew that family can be chosen, created, and celebrated without anyone's permission or approval. I knew that my worth as a mother, as a human being, was not dependent on how others categorized me or defined my relationships. I had spent so many years afraid that not being Sarah's biological mother made my love somehow less valid, less meaningful, less real than the love of women who had given birth to their children. But now I understand that choosing to love someone, choosing to show up day after day, year after year, without the guarantee of genetic obligation or social recognition, that's not less than biological love. In many ways, it's more powerful, more intentional, more pure. Biological mothers love their children partly because evolution and hormones and societal expectations tell them to. But chosen mothers, stepmothers, adoptive mothers, grandmothers who raise grandchildren, women who step into maternal roles because a child needs them. We love because we decide to love. We show up because we choose to show up. We sacrifice because we want to sacrifice, not because we have to. That doesn't make us saints or martyrs. It makes us women who understand that family is created through daily acts of love and commitment, not through DNA or legal documents or social recognition. To anyone reading this who has ever felt like their love was considered second class because it wasn't written in blood, your love counts. It matters deeply. Your presence in someone's life has immeasurable value that cannot be quantified by DNA tests or birth certificates or other people's definitions of what makes a real family. You are real family. You always were, and you always will be. And if they can't see it, if they can't appreciate the gift of your chosen love, that's their loss, not yours. Build your own family. Choose people who choose you back with the same enthusiasm and commitment. Create traditions that celebrate the love you have, not the love you wish you had. Surround yourself with people who understand that love is an action, not just a feeling. People who show up consistently, who celebrate your successes and support you through your struggles, who see your worth without needing to categorize or compare your role in their lives. Life is too short and too precious to spend it begging for belonging in spaces where your love isn't fully appreciated. You belong wherever you choose to plant your love and tend it with care, patience, and unwavering dedication. I learned that at 73, after spending decades seeking validation that I didn't need from people whose love I already had in abundance. I hope you learn it much sooner than I did. Build your own traditions. Create your own definitions of family. Choose love over obligation, appreciation over expectation, joy over resentment. And remember that the child you raised with such devotion, even if they don't always express it perfectly, was shaped by your love in ways that will influence them for the rest of their lives. The values you taught, the security you provided, the example you set of what unconditional love looks like, those things become part of who they are, regardless of how they categorize your relationship. You did good work. You made a difference. You mattered then, You matter now, and you will always matter. With all my love and hard-earned wisdom, Grandma Margaret P.S. Sarah called me yesterday to tell me that she started a tradition with Emma and Jake, teaching them to make my sugar cookies every year for Christmas. I want them to know where this recipe came from, she said. I want them to understand that the most important family traditions are the ones created by love, not inherited through blood. Maybe she understood more than I gave her credit for. Maybe we both learned something valuable this year about what it really means to be family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Your words truly help this channel grow.